Awaken to the meaning of my heart, that to feel love and oneness is to live, and this, the magic of our golden change, is all the truth I know or seek, O sage. Today we're going to discuss the radical non-inaccessibility of God. Now, behind this somewhat convoluted title, I hope to reveal and explain an altogether simple conception. The key word for us today is access. What does it mean to access something, to be able to access something? If we've just met someone new, how do we know which parts of ourselves we allow them to access? How do they know which parts of themselves they allow us to access? For many people that we meet, upon first encounter, we feel a wariness, a guardedness, something inside of us that says, I'm not going to share my deepest secrets with this person. I don't want to, and it is perhaps not even safe to allow this person access into my heart. By contrast, recall those rare, but perhaps not so rare occasions when, upon first meeting someone, we know in a lightning flash that this is someone I could allow access to my entire inner world. However slow the development may be at first, this is someone who I can allow to see me. I can show myself, and I have the strength to see them as well. This person and I, we can move through the truth of each other. We can discover a trajectory of ever-increasing revealment, passages of truth from one interior to the other interior, to the point of that most cherished and beautiful intimacy and love, where one person can say to the other, not only do you access me, you are in me. You are an essential element to my own access to myself. Were it not for you, I never would have reached myself. The door would have remained closed upon my own interior. I would have remained, as it were, a locked chest, my heart shuttered off, beaten back by the rough waters of the world and the weariness which otherwise entrapped my mind in its own narrow view of things, its own narrow way of living life. In such a rapturous encounter, we know a deeper meaning to access, not as a one-time entry, not as a mere passage from the outside of a building to the inside or from one corner of the country to another. Rather, it is access as an open flow from one access point to another access point. This requires openness, willingness, acceptance, patience when the doors won't open, tenderness when what the doors open upon is rough and painful and hard to bear, strength and encouragement to see both across a new threshold that is gone across together, and finally a courage of spirit which turns this fire of access out into the world, so that what has been catalyzed, galvanized, sparked into life, and, in a sense, purified through the circle of access between beloved and beloved, is able to turn its windows out onto the wider world and allow that access of love to flourish. If we turn now to God and the spiritual record of humanity, we will find many testaments to a feeling and experience of God having such an access to us, to God as our ultimate beloved and accessor, whose entry into us and knowledge of us paves the way for our total joy, for our absolute flourishing. And through the communion of essences that love's access makes possible, the flourishing of the absolute in us. For God's knowledge of us transforms us from the inside out. It precedes and runs ahead of us. It turns us into an access of the infinite in this world and reveals to us the infinite access that we are. Psalm 139 reads, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God! How vast is the sum of them! If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake, and I am still with you. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me, and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Now, if we look in greater detail at this psalm, we will see just how deep God's access goes in space and in time. This is a psalm testifying to God's total knowledge of us, God's total access to our being. In the present, He knows our movements, our thoughts, our words. It is a knowledge of ourselves that we cannot attain, it is so high. Nowhere could we go and not find God knowing us. In the heights and in the depths, in the brights of morning, in the depths of sea, even in darkness God is there, for night is bright as day in the light of God's knowledge. For that knowledge is a presence, is presence. It exceeds all appearances, and yet for the psalmist in his praise, that presence is realer than anything his eyes could see, or that his mind might think, or that his lips might speak. For it is a presence that is inescapable, an all-pervasive knowledge of all. Then, looking to the past, the psalmist traces his existence back to his mother's womb, acknowledging and realizing that God formed him there, formed his inner parts. Our physical, biological, chemical frame was never hidden from God, and this intricate weaving stretches far past one's individual birth. My mother's womb is not just my birth mother's womb, but the entire womb of life, the ecosystem of waters and plants and animals, of the planet Earth, and of all the substructures of matter as such, the power of its laws and its causalities, operating at the furthest reaches of the universe. The womb is indeed the Logos itself in the broadest sense, the divine wisdom or Sophia, or again, the Holy Mother Shakti, giving energy and force and light to all that comes into existence. God knows the manifestation, for it is his own. He saw this entire unformed substance, from the formless mixtures all the way to the writing of today's very book, the days that form us. Hence how vast is the sum of these thoughts of God. They are infinitely more than the sand, and to count them is to awaken and be with God. The psalm ends, nonetheless, with an exhortation to God. Search me and know my heart, try my thoughts. We might find it curious to end the psalm in such a way, after so many beautiful verses acknowledging God's limitless knowledge of us. Why then ask God to know us? Well, the final verse tells us, because we sense there remain grievous ways in us, ways that, even if they aren't wicked or malicious per se, are perhaps still hateful, not yet driven by the full light of God. This is how I would interpret the verse I have thus far skipped over. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God! O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. These strong and violent words from the psalmist speak against those who do not recognize God's knowledge, God's access to every facet of our being. The psalmist speaks with a very human emotion here, hating those who hate the Lord, who go the way of vanity, who play finite games with fame and fortune, who put their treasure anywhere but in the Lord. He loathes those who think they can rise up against God, who think they could know more or better than him, who are not humbled by his knowledge of our very soul. Those who act out of ignorance and disrespect for the Lord, who act out of selfishness for themselves, are deemed enemies of God, enemies of humanity, enemies of righteousness, enemies of the cosmic creation, of the flourishing absolute. For what are the ways of man compared to the way everlasting? What is a safe with a few jewels locked away in it, compared to the infinity of God's precious thoughts? When the psalmist turns to himself in the last two verses, asking God to search him and know his heart, so that every grievous way may be rooted out, it is not because God does not already know his innermost thoughts, but because through this supplication the psalmist's own intent is turned, magnetized toward the object of worship here, who is none other than the creator of the universe, the highest nature herself. We ask God to search us, to access us, because deep down we know that when God accesses us, we are given a new access to ourselves. For through the love that we show towards God, we access God's knowledge of us. We access the Lord's vision for us, the vision of the Lord in us, and ultimately we access the Godhead that we are. We tear ourselves above the past, present, and future of our individual life and discover ourselves resituated, reoriented to the infinite path, to a zone of eternity which is flooding this finite terrain, this transitory world with its light, and turning all of creation into an expression of God's glory. The way everlasting of the psalmist is a path of the glorification of creation as the very means whereby we access the Creator through our very substance of body and mind and soul, which can be lifted into the infinite light and made finally a vessel for that light. When God has access to us, when we allow God to access us in this complete and total way, we become in the world an access point for God, and therefore access the divinity that is already there, that is already baked into the goods, that divinity that proves itself unstoppably profound and powerful, which creation, as its access point, is. God is creator and creation, and the bind between creator and creation is one of knowledge, for God knows the past of our formation, the present of our situation, and the future of our destination, and also a connection of love, the love that an artist has for its artwork, attending to details down to the most minute stroke, making drafts, discarding poor copies, perfecting techniques, so that when the artwork is finished, it will be a true and beautiful expression of what the artist has intended to say, the vision the artist has intended to communicate, and, at the extreme, the artwork as something consubstantial with the artist, so that the artist leaves nothing behind of itself, empties itself totally into the artwork, through a love so perfect that the artwork, the creation, embodies, manifests the entire fullness of that Creator's mind and heart. That is the dynamic we adore in this creation. That is the access which the artist has to the artwork, and which the Creator has to the glorious creation of his material being, up through his vital and mental and psychic being, and finally his supramental being, or the one divine being consciousness bliss, reaches its hand down into the material creation and transforms it more and more into carriers, distributors, broadcasters of the purest spiritual light, dispensers of the divine nectar from the very heart of God. For the Absolute wants to be near us, wants to be inside us, in our world. And the truth is, this is already the case, only we fight it. We do not allow this nearness. We lose sight of it and prevent God's creation and God Himself through that creation from accessing us, when the most basic fact of our existence is that existence is love, that God is that existence. And the listener may say, what about all of the evil, all of the injustice in our current world and throughout history? To that I would humbly say, these evils bear no necessity. These evils are products of our freedom, products of our own tendency to close ourselves off from the infinite and to prefer over it our finite games, our finite plans for finite gains. But that is the freedom we are given. We are free to put up a sign that says, no access, no entry gained today. The heart is closed, the mind is shut off, the body stays in fear. We have that freedom, and we know what it leads to. To allow ourselves to be accessed by God is to go beyond these enclosures, the egotism, the habits of the past, the grievous ways of humanity. It is to open oneself to the path everlasting. God's kindness is to be near us, nearer than we can even imagine, every step of that path. A path of trial and tribulation, of purification and insight, of connection and encounter with the world and our fellow human beings, and finally of God realization and the divinization of life itself. That divinization is a process. The laws of nature may change. The laws of human behavior must change. The ruling protocols of the mind must give way to the higher protocols of the intuitive mind, then of the mind of light, whose contact with God is continuous, supple, joyous, and ever renewed by His infinite light, strong enough to overcome every resistance to its pouring. Our hearts, too, must bring forward our psychic being, that secret self or godhood inside us, which through prayer, meditation, and selfless activity, through sincere aspiration, self-giving, and surrender to God, can come to take greater and greater control over all the other aspects of our being, so that we are united more and more with the very work and love of the Lord Supreme, whose kindness is exceedingly pure. The Shvetashvara Upanishad reads, "Know Him to be enshrined in your heart always. Truly there is nothing more in life to know. Meditate and realize this world is filled with the presence of God. The self is hidden in the hearts of all, as butter lies hidden in the cream. Realize the self in the depths of meditation, the Lord of love, supreme reality, who is the goal of all knowledge." Coming finally to the title of today's talk, the radical non-inaccessibility of God. Why have I not simply offered these ideas under the title of God's accessibility? First of all, God is in the creation, but this is not transparently obvious to our natural perception. We aren't exactly born into a culture which prepares us to constantly tune in to the divinity of the world around us. Therefore, to say God is accessible anywhere and everywhere, while this is true, risks overlooking the part we play in allowing this access. We have a choice to either directly participate in allowing God to access this world, or to get ourselves more and more in the mire of desires which only bring us misery, and cut ourselves off from the divine heart of existence, mistaking our consciousness for the narrow individual we think we are, instead of transforming our individual into a vessel of outflowing light, into an instrument of the Divine Mother, whose one will is to transform this nature into an expression of her limitless compassion, her limitless power, her limitless bliss. It is not the accessibility of God directly because we must choose, and this choice requires effort on our part, an effort of purification, not something cruel, but simply an anchoring of ourselves in the Godhead. It is to throw the harpoon into the tender flesh of the divine, and pull upon that rope every day of our lives, until we reach its body, and it embraces us, such that we are immortally ours, and the access is complete. One access of the One, spreading itself beyond belief. As spiritual life deepens, as we divinize the world around us through our thoughts, words, and deeds, we come to see more and more that our awareness is the Godhead. Our own awareness is our most direct access point to God. Therein we find all the truths of conscience, of the next right movement, and of the higher vision to transform, and of the Lord of love, who is the supreme reality. Now, by awareness here, I mean that pure light of consciousness which stands behind all the changing things. That awareness that is not the cause of suffering, that is not my suffering body, my fearful mind, my addiction to habits that cause me misery. Awareness is not attached to any of that. And if we can develop, in a very simple way, a practice of awareness, God will be unleashed and unveiled there. As Padmasambhava says, awareness is space, and we can always bring more awareness to a situation in life. And the more that we bring awareness to a situation, from a point of non-attachment, of seeing things clearly, without the filter of desire and ego and possessiveness, and also without the definitions of ourselves that our former habits would normally impose upon us, the more spacious we will discover that situation to be, and wherever there is spaciousness in creation, God is there. God seems most inaccessible to us when we feel there is no space, no room to move, no room to grow. But through awareness we can find that room to widen the consciousness, room to practice equanimity, an equanimity that springs from the acknowledgement that this cosmos, this creation, is a work in progress, is incomplete, as we are in our journey toward God realization and the divinization of life. God is there precisely in all the unknown interstices of life, waiting for us to give access to His Spirit through our spirit, to allow a oneness of vision to explode upon the scene, in the quietest of ways or in the most bombastic of ways. What matters here is to give God access to our space and to access the space of God. For the more we reflect upon this, the more we make this a practice, the very rhythm of our heart, the more we will see that at root God is never inaccessible. The true movement can always be sought and found. The everlasting way can be tracked through the mud of the grievous ways. The iniquitous acts of humanity can always be overcome when we open our hearts, open our minds, and direct our soul upwards, saying, "Search me, God, search my thoughts. Search my heart. Try me. Teach me to know you as you have always known me. Through our one being with you, Lord God, make your very accessibility our world." I thank you for tuning in to our Golden Change and today's talk on the radical non-inaccessibility of God. May you go in peace, and may the light of the Lord be forever at your horizon, and the love of the Lord forever in your heart. Thank you.